And the idea for me is to introduce people in the context of what they do, because then you get both parts of that story. Notice I didn't say both sides. You get both parts. If you want to have a thoughtful conversation, you have to have information first. So you have to do research on the person that's going to be your guest. Oh, but I know most of my guests. Okay. But how well? Right? In other words, do you know where they went to high school? Do you know who their favorite sports team is? Like all these little things, and this gets back to the art of conversation. If you know these little details, you may not have to use them all. But if you can, it just makes the conversation so much better and so much more authentic, right? And so much more natural.
And welcome back, everybody, to Edric, Poon and Company, the podcast where anybody can inspire everybody. I'm Edric, your host, and this week we've got Michael Waitze, the founder of Michael Waitze Media. He hosts and produces numerous, and I say numerous, podcasts, such as Asia Insurtech Podcast, AsiaTechPodcast.com show, eCommerce Undercover, Thai Game Changer podcast, and the most recent one is the Wolfcast. I'm sure that there are some more. Michael's Productions has listeners in over 137 countries, totaling over 700 episodes. That, of course, helped to hone his craft and to be where he is today in terms of podcasting. So I've invited Michael to come on, and he's so graciously come to share a lot more in terms of how he got to where he is, his podcasting journey, and also developing the art of conversation. So without further ado, I'd love to be able to say, well, put your hands together for Michael Waitze, but, you know, YouTube is what it is. So, hey, Michael, how are you, man?
I can hear the crowd roaring in the background for you.
Yeah, you know, if you had a concussion, but...
How are you doing, Edric?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Hey, again, thanks so much. Now, just a quick backstory, right? We were supposed to do this on Wednesday, and I had this extremely terrible technological failure, okay? For the EPIC podcast, we had an epic fail. Was one of the, it was one of those days, right? Whereby your t-shirt was on backwards, your underwear had 3 or 4 holes, you know, just nothing was working the way it was supposed to. But today, thank goodness, thank the universe, and thank whatever higher powers that you believe in. And of course, thank you for coming on to this show. So you have such a huge repertoire, all right, of podcasts at this point in time. And it's so weird, right, that your background was actually so much working for Goldman Sachs, Citi, Morgan Stanley, and all these other guys, right? How the hell did you end up just getting into podcasting after all of that?
So it's a long story, but media is something that's always been super interesting to me. And as you know, media has power. And I think most of media today gets used for negative power, and I'd like to infuse it with a little bit of positive power and just inform people about what's going on out here. But I remember very clearly when I was a little boy, if I was at a party and there was a video camera there and a microphone, I always grabbed the mic. And I was the guy at the party who always was interviewing the other party guests. I don't know where it came from. Nobody in my family's in the media. Nobody's ever even tried. Well, that's not fair. My brother was in a couple of movies as an extra. Really? Yeah, but just when he was in between his undergrad and grad school, he went out to California. He's a very, very handsome dude and was just hanging around in Hollywood and got a couple of parts as an extra in a couple of movies. So fair enough. But if you fast forward, and I've always followed the technology around media, as you know, creating media has always been very expensive, requiring billions of dollars of sort of infrastructure spending just to be able to get it out there. And I've been paying attention, and I believe it was Rob Glazer who started a company called Real Player. He was a Microsoft developer, I believe, and he was trying to convince Microsoft to get into the the streaming business. But back then, you know, modems were 54K modems, and Real Player played real slowly. But when I saw it, I had this epiphany. And that epiphany was that if this works and if bandwidth improves, then anybody can have their own TV station, because that's what it felt like back then. You didn't really consider like getting your own radio station because everything seemed to be moving towards video even back then. But bandwidth wasn't big enough. So I just kept paying attention and paying attention. When the technology caught up to my vision, I had to pounce. I had to. And a few other things came together actually. When I was a limited partner in Ardent Capital, and I actually watched the formation and the genesis of a company called eCommerce.
Yep.
So the brothers and the team that built that business are not just prolific business builders, but some of the most incredible business builders in Southeast Asia. And when we went to, metaphorically to Silicon Valley to tell them, you should invest in a business that's already been built in the United States, e-commerce facilitation. It doesn't exist in Southeast Asia. There are 670 million people. And with all the statistics we could give them about how digital businesses were growing, they still weren't interested. And the reason why was because they said we don't have enough visibility, they said, on what's happening in Asia in general. We definitely don't have enough visibility on what's happening in Southeast Asia in particular. And that's a market gap. So I wanted to fill that gap. So that was sort of the genesis of this whole idea. It's had a few iterations, but that's how it started, really.
Very, very interesting. And you decided to also kind of leverage on the whole passion to interview, to be with people. At the end of the day, when you see all of this, do you prioritize more of the business content and the industry news, or do you just really enjoy talking to people?
So I think that, and remember, I don't do this for me, right? So it's, in a way, it's an interesting question. I think humans really can only make really visceral connections with other humans. And what I like to do, and I think it's a kind of a different methodology than other people use. First of all, I don't think I interview people. And I think I said that to you offline, right? I don't consider myself somebody who interviews people. I feel like I'm much more comfortable having a conversation, but I also believe that the world kind of revolves around storytelling. And if you're not telling a story, if you're just asking stock questions, right? Why did you found it? Why did you found this company? What's your cost of customer acquisition? What's your attraction? All these kind of garbage questions. Nobody listens and nobody learns. And the idea for me is to introduce people in the context of what they do, because then you get both parts of that story. Notice I didn't say both sides. You get both parts. But I'm super interested in why you're podcasting, why you have that really fancy microphone, and why you're really interested in telling these stories. I know why I do it. I'm curious why you're doing it.
Well, thanks for asking, really.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.
You want to tell me why?
I'll start with the first thing. Now, this microphone was purely because I've always had that dream of owning this particular microphone. I've looked at the Shure Super 55 for a decade now, ever since I saw it in all those movies back then. And I just said, I have to get me one of these. Right?
It's a classic.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. I mean, even if you told me it was a crappy mic, I'd still go, I'm still spending money on this because I want it. And I didn't want that shell of a microphone that they sell for $40. I want the whole thing. I want the whole shebang. I want it. Right? Okay, so I got it. I saved a little bit of money. I got it. It's not that expensive, but it's okay.
It's not that expensive though, right?
Yeah,
what does the Super 55 go for?
I think it's like $300. Something like that.
Oh wow, it's more expensive than this one. The SM7B I think was.
It is. But yours is about 200 something. It's around this similar price range.
Something. Yeah. It's the same. You have a better mic because you're a richer guy, so fair enough.
No, not at all. I spend all my money on my mics and nothing on my podcast. It's great.
So you can't. Now you can't.
I have priorities. I got them all right. So back to the podcast reason, right? It's exactly like what you're. Very, very similar to what you've mentioned, which is it's not about interviewing people. It's really about the telling of the stories, right? And I realize that many a times when we listen to content out there, especially there's so much targeted advertising that goes out there and says, hey, you should buy this, and this brand is great and that service is awesome. But I can't get behind a brand, for example. Okay, I'm not mentioning anyone or anything in particular, but let's just say, for example, that this brand is an awesome brand, but if the person is a complete, the complete opposite of what a good public figure should be, or an inspirational character, I can't get behind that brand. And then I realized, okay, how can we put stories together or put a platform together whereby many of these individuals, we can really humanize the brands now. We have an opportunity to create a platform to share with others that these are people who are successful in our eyes, who have done something wonderful with their products and services, who are definitely securing and cementing their place in the world and society, and gracious enough to share their learnings with us because they are still learning. They too wake up and put their pants on one leg at a time. They put on their shoes one foot at a time, hopefully, right? At the end of the day, we're all human. We all believe in that, and there's nothing more beautiful than, again, still going back to our roots of sitting around a hearth, a fire, and listening to stories of giant spaceships coming and sending us all sorts of new technology.
Yeah, and look, you've made an active choice to do video. I would ask you why you think the video side of it is so important.
Oh, I think that for me, it was a new thing because I started a really trashy podcast about 8 years ago. It was called the Singapod. It was absolutely trashy. 3 guys drunk just on audio, right? But anyway, that's a story for another day, right? If I could still remember. But ultimately, I did dabble in the audio part of it. I realized, it works. It works. It's lovely. Then I thought, okay, might as well put it on YouTube, right? Because I can't seem to put audio on YouTube. So I said, screw it, and I'll just put video. So if you look at the very, very first video that I have on this channel, it's obscenely bad. Like it should not even be played on YouTube, but it's there, right? Everybody starts from somewhere. It's grainy. I was using a 10-year-old laptop that was literally I mean, seriously, I was staring at the laptop the way it was staring back at me with absolutely
like, what are we doing here?
Yes, why are we here? Are you kidding me? You had 10 years, dude, and now you're doing this to me? Are you kidding me? So it's like bringing a 60-year-old car to a drag race. Even the car's like going, what the hell are you doing?
I just want to go home, the car's saying.
Yeah. So that's exactly it. And then it became, I started getting wonderful support from all our listeners. And bit by bit, we just moved and improved, right? Just deep dived into it and go, okay, I made a mistake with the video. What can I do now? How do I improve it? Do I need better gear? And this is something that I think I would love to be able to share with everybody is that how anybody gets started with podcasting in itself. Like sometimes some people will think, oh, I need a gimmick. I need a persona. I need a story. I need all of this, I need the gear, I need something fancy, this and that. But ultimately, in my point of view, it boils down to content. Number one, what's your real message? What do you want to provide to the world, right? Number two is, of course, then it gets technical, right? It's your ability, of course, and your audio. Audio is very important, I realize.
Has to be good.
More important than video. Yeah, audio is so much more important than video. Once you screw up audio, everything goes. But, I mean, that's just for me. Like, what about you? When you started out, what were your thoughts compared to now? And, what kind of growth have you seen along the way in yourself?
So I asked you about video because I started with video. My first show was called Michael Talks Tech. We shot with 3 cameras.
Wow, fancy.
We had professional. It was very fancy. We rented 3 cameras for a day. We spent like $1,000 a day to rent 3 cameras. We did 2 or 3 episodes a day. And my partner at the time was producing the video and spending like days editing. And he did a super great job. I mean, that's his business, right? So he did an incredible job at doing the editing and adding music tracks and adding a forward and an afterward and stuff, right? But it just became, and my philosophy back then was, if you do the video, you get the audio for free, right? Because it's not a silent movie.
Mm-hmm.
So you can always strip out the audio. I knew little back then about how many tracks of audio you could record. I highly recommend nobody does a 1-track audio recording because it makes it impossible to edit. If I sneeze now, you can't take it out because it'll take out something that you're saying. Or if we're talking together, there's just no way to edit a 1-track audio in a way that sounds great, I think. But anyway, back then, so we did some pretty incredible recordings. We actually used a co-working space in Bangkok. In a way, a little surreptitiously. Like, we didn't tell them we were going to do it, but we just went in early on a Saturday and Sunday. Nobody was really there. And the floor where we were recording, mostly on Saturdays, nobody was there. And if somebody walked by, we kind of didn't care. The videos were really great, and they were like an hour long, and we had some pretty incredible people on it. but it was just taking up too much. It was too expensive. And when I say that, people think about the cost, meaning the price, but I don't really mean that. It was too time expensive, right? In other words, if I recorded a podcast yesterday, let's say, with Microsoft, it's already edited and the episode summary is already written and I can publish it whenever I want. It's done. But if you want to have super high quality video production, it takes time because now you're editing in 3 dimensions, right? Because you've got the time dimension, you've got the sound dimension, and you've got the video dimension. And even if I say something that I love, but the video is scratchy, how do you prioritize that? It's just hard when you're not using a bunch of different cameras and super high quality equipment and have super high quality editors on board, right? So doing that alone is super hard. I give you a ton of credit because I couldn't do it anymore. And frankly, the guy that I was working with just gave up. He was like, this is taking up way too much of my time. And I'm just going to go back to doing my regular business. But so I learned then a whole bunch of stuff. One is, have great partners. Nobody succeeds alone. But also, if you can get the right cadence on a podcast, get the right audio, which I think is super important. I've recorded prior to buying this microphone, I've recorded with some very bad setups. And like you said, when I go back and listen, they're terrible. They're really terrible. They're embarrassingly terrible. But I don't care because, 700 recordings in, now I feel like I know what I'm doing. It's just like anything else. If I'd made 700 pizzas, I think I'd be pretty good at it. Right?
That is true.
But I think the sound really matters. And one of my friends at Morgan Stanley once said to me that one of Frank Sinatra's biggest inventions or innovations was that he used the microphone like it was another instrument. Right? So the combination of his voice and the microphone was another instrument, not just the band in the back. And that he figured out how to make it sound like melodic just using these 2 things. I think about that when I'm recording.
So, okay, because I love music as well. And when any of the singers have to actually learn microphone dynamics,
right?
This is something they don't really teach you in terms of nobody teaches you this stuff. The angle of your microphone, the kind of microphone, nobody does. You just gotta figure it out until you get it right. Because like what you mentioned, everybody's cadence is different, everybody's projection will be different, everybody's plosives will be very different. How you do your P's and your B's and your M's and your O's and your even the amount of how we breathe is so very, very important. So you've got such great technical skills at doing this. You see, I mean, you're using a windshield, right? You're only using.
I'm just using so the SM7B ships with this windshield on it. This is the way it ships.
Correct.
And
you don't even use the pop filter.
So my other microphone that I have here has a pop filter on it. Because it's a Rode pod mic. Yeah, I know. I would never use one of those, to be fair. First of all, I think they look terrible. Yeah. And second of all, I don't think they provide the right type of plosive protection or de-essing that you need. But I want to tell you a funny story. Because you're right, nobody teaches you mic technique. And I didn't know a darn thing I didn't even know the difference between a condenser mic and a dynamic mic. And when I went out to buy like my first fancy microphone, right, I'd made a little bit of money doing this and I said, I know I need better equipment. Let me go buy a fancy mic. So I went out and I bought like a 150 or who knows how much money it cost me mic, but it was a condenser mic. And I just didn't understand why it didn't sound great. I didn't know. Anyway, I used that for a while. It sounded okay. But I wanted this sound. And I remember actually looking and watching other people, mostly on YouTube, to find out what kind of microphone they were using. It took me a while to figure out that this SM7B was what I wanted. But again, I still didn't know how to use it. And I went out and bought it and I hooked it up and it sounded terrible. It sounded really soft. I couldn't get like you know what a sound wave looks like, right? And you can tell if it's going to be too soft or too loud. I mean, obviously you can look at the clipping mechanisms, right? But without doing that, you just saw this tiny little wave. And I just thought, I mean, I spent all this money on this microphone. Is it broken?
So what did you find out to be the problem?
I do what I do now for everything. I went to YouTube and just literally typed in like how to use an SM7B just to make sure that I set it up properly.
Right.
In
So you
fact, I
needed a
had
cloud
set it
lifter.
up properly. Yeah, but I was thinking about getting a cloud lifter or a FET head or something like that,
Uh-huh.
but I did not. What my problem was, I was using it like this.
Oh no.
I didn't
Okay,
know you had to
okay.
do. I always thought, and I think a lot of people think this too. You know, when you see a musician in a studio having their mouth right up to the mic, you think, oh, this is just an affectation, not a skill. But actually, and you know this just from your own work, if you talk over here or if you speak over here, it's very different than if you speak here.
Mm-hmm.
And to be fair, your voice really only has to go across the mic. It doesn't have to go into the mic. It can.
Yep.
But all of these little things would be neat if somebody told you at the beginning.
Yeah, to be honest, we could make money from this. Just set up a real quick course, go online, listen to it. Hey, it's a 15-minute tech check, and it will save your life. To be honest, right, I was an idiot when I first bought this mic. When I first bought my very, very first XLR mic, I
Right.
bought the cable, and then I bought a cheap mic. Right, I started with USBs, and then I moved on to one cheapo analog mic. And then after that, I thought, okay, yeah, I'm ready. And then I realized, shit, where do I plug it into?
What does it go into?
Yeah, I did not even have an audio interface.
What do you use now? I forget. I know we talked about this last time. You use the 2x2?
Yeah.
2i2?
I'm using the 2i2. Yeah, the Scarlett,
The Scarlett.
2i2.
Focusrite, yeah.
Yeah. So far it's okay. There's a cheaper one out there, but look, I'm partly vain and partly operational. So that would mean that I want function and I want form.
Yes, I'm very similar. The 2i2 actually is what I recommend to people today to buy, even just for home
really?
use. And the reason why is because Focusrite makes great products. But the mistake that I made was I never thought I'd be in the same room with somebody and want another microphone plugged in.
Ah. So you
Right?
bought the Solo.
How about the Solo? Because I figured I'm just going to be doing this alone. I didn't understand what the other stuff, and again, I had no idea how to use it. And when I finally figured it out, I started laughing. But the Focusrite stuff is actually really good. I upgraded as well. I mean, I didn't upgrade. I just changed, right? Because I wanted to have some more functionality. But I really trust this guy called Tom Buck. I don't know if you've ever listened to him.
Tom Buck.
But if I have a technical problem about recording audio or video, I just go to Tom Buck's YouTube page. He's sensible, a little goofy, but very sensible. I think he's purposely goofy. And I've learned a ton there.
Okay. Hey,
Just
shout out
a
to Tom
ton.
Buck. If you,
Yeah.
I don't think he'll be listening, but yeah, check it out. Tom Buck. He's wow, he's got a lot of stuff in Final Cut. He's got thumbnails. Wow, that's a lot.
So he teaches this. So he partially creates this for us. It also creates stuff for his classes as well. So he's very good at this. He's got a good voice. He's got an incredible setup at home. He and his wife podcast weekly. He does a few different shows, but I've learned a ton here. A ton.
All right. And that's on the technical aspect. Now, in terms of content, right, where do you get your inspiration from? I'm sure that as a podcaster, you too would be listening to the podcast. Who do you listen to?
So that's a great question. I want to say that my introduction to podcasting was with a guy named John Gruber. And to be honest, I don't even know how I found him. I really don't. I read tech news, and I've been doing that for years, and I mean like decades actually. I read I used to get the Wall Street Journal when I was in college, and I started reading Walt Mossberg's technology column when it first came out. And I remember thinking, wow, that's got to be the coolest job in the world, because he writes for like a real newspaper. Right? He wasn't writing for PC Magazine, nothing against them, or Macworld. He was writing for the Wall Street Journal, and he invented that, because he was already a writer at the Journal. And he said, I want to write about tech because I think tech is going to be consumerized and I think it's going to change the way people live. And they said, okay. And that literally made him famous, right? So he went from just being this obscure dude at the Wall Street Journal, to somebody who started this business with Kara Swisher called All Things Digital, right? They started doing these conferences and stuff.
Yep.
And they just got uber famous. But my first like podcast was the talk show with John Gruber. And because he still has this website called Daring Fireball. I still don't know why he calls it that. I probably found this back in like 1997 or 1998. I can't remember. But when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, a lot of people started blogging about like, this is going to be a disaster, or this is going to be great or whatever. And Gruber at the time was a technologist, but started doing this blog called Daring Fireball. And then he had a show as well called The Talk Show, where he talked about Apple. And he actually talked about Apple with this guy named Dan Benjamin. So Dan basically did what you and I do. He hosted the show, but it was really just so Gruber had a weekly platform to talk, to kind of be like an online pundit for Apple in the podcast space. And they would have like 2 hour or 2.5 hour conversations. I just thought, this is great.
Because it gave you such insight and insider news that you wouldn't have gotten, or at least I would assume it wouldn't have been shown in any kind of newspaper. Too long? 2 hours?
It's too. No, I mean, it's too long to write an article about that. No one's going to read it, but people will listen to the conversation. And I learned a whole bunch of different things about that. First of all, Dan Benjamin was the pioneer in the podcast network space in the United States, started a company called 5by5.tv. And for anybody who's interested really in learning about podcasting, watch Dan Benjamin's stuff as well. He was really the pioneer, but a few other people started doing it back then. And this is also when I started thinking about the business. So I always wondered, like, who was getting paid and how are they getting paid? Because after a certain amount of time, Gruber left the 5by5 network and then kind of signed on with somebody else to do the production for like a year. And there was a little bit of clamoring going on in the sort of Apple pundit space when he left. And then when he left, the second guy went to do it himself. I thought, there must be so much money in this. And it turned out there is. But he left and started doing his own production because he figured, I'm now going to be the host. I'm now going to get the guests, and I'm going to control this conversation myself. And that was an epiphany for me.
And eventually, what did you model your show? I mean, what was it in that show that actually got you hooked? And what was it that you actually took away from that to model it into your own show?
So remember back then that Apple was like this little crappy company that was going to go bankrupt.
Yep.
But I told you I started really, really getting into tech when I was young. And, you know, I used to have a typewriter at college and I used to have to write papers on it. And it was a nightmare. And I was poor. I was on a full scholarship. And I think I probably stole that typewriter from my mom. And, you know, paper to me came at a premium because if I messed up, you know, you had that whiteout stuff, but it looked terrible. And I didn't want to turn it in with that. And I couldn't afford to just keep buying paper. And I went to a college where, like, you know, 98% of the people were ridiculously rich. Like my roommate's mother, its name was on one of the auditoriums.
Okay, that's money.
Are you with me? Anyway, one day I saw a kid walking around with a computer. And he was walking around with it. So my roommate actually bought one of the first compact laptops or portables. It was more like a compact suitcase, but it still looked really cool.
Yeah.
And you could see where it was going. But the thing that killed me was the guy walking around with the Macintosh. I actually remember saying to him, "What is that?" And when I figured out what it was, I said, "Can I borrow that to write my paper?" He was like, "Sure." And I was just write this incredible stuff. And it didn't matter because if you write it out of order or if you have the wrong spelling or do anything wrong, like when you first see a word processor, it's like a gift from God. It just is. You're like, you mean I backspace and it's just gone? It's a weird thing to think about today. But anyway, so I knew what the Mac was. And when Steve Jobs came back, everyone, you have to remember the famous Michael Dell line, what would you do with Apple if you bought it? It's shut it down and I'd give the money back to the shareholders. So I followed Apple really closely because I'm kind of an underdog kind of guy. And I liked his format of having guests come on and talk about tech. And again, if you just like super fast forward to like a few years ago, Nobody was doing that in Southeast Asia. I wanted to have my own show. I'd already tested a couple of ideas. They kind of worked. And the Asia Tech Podcast just sounded like the perfect name. And to be fair, the other guys that I listen to a lot do this thing called the Accidental Tech Podcast. You may notice a similarity.
Yep.
Well, they both start with A. So ATP is an abbreviation that I love. And the guys that do the Accidental Tech Podcast are brilliant. Marco Arment was one of the first developers to work on Tumblr. So he was probably a shareholder. So when Tumblr got sold to Yahoo, my grandmother always said to me, don't count anybody else's money. So I don't know how much money he made, but I think it was more than $1 million. If it got sold for $1 billion, and he was literally the first engineer that was hired there. And to be fair, Marco also invested in Gimlet Media, which then sold to Spotify for $230 million. And Marco's got a pretty good track record, but he's also an incredible technologist. He wrote Instapaper, which was one of the first applications on the iPhone that could actually save things off the internet and allow you to read it later if you didn't have connectivity. And just listening to him talk with John Siracusa, who was the guy who wrote the seminal reviews of OS X every year for Ars Technica, also a deep technologist, understands all this stuff inside and out. Just the conversations that they have, kind of moderated by their friend Casey Liss, are just super good. And when I listen to that stuff, I want to have those same conversations out here, because no one's really doing it. And to be fair, nobody's really skilled to do it. Like Marco's superpowers, he could make really technical things really simple for people to understand. John's super detailed and has a real great sense of like operating systems and file systems and stuff like that. And if you're into that kind of tech, it's super. And Casey does a pretty good job of moderating it. So it's great to listen to.
And have you found yours?
Yeah, I think I have. I like being able to. So on this show, I will talk a lot because you've invited me to talk. I could sit here and ask you questions all day because I'm very interested. But I don't think that's your modus operandi. So there's that. But I've always been a really good listener. I'm super interested in other people, right? So I'm an extrovert, which most people misunderstand as someone who likes to get a lot of attention, but it's really a person who gets energy from other people. And as an extrovert, it means I love having a conversation with other people. I like being able to tease things out of them that maybe they haven't spoken about yet, and introducing them and informing the rest of the world about them. And that makes me really happy.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's something I did want to, I mean, you actually jumped right into it. I did want to ask you what it's like for you to be on the other side of the table now. Because most of the time, like what you mentioned, you're the one who's asking the questions and you're listening. But now all of a sudden, the roles are reversed. Does it feel uncomfortable for you? Sometimes it's nice. It's very reflective in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I'm self-aware. I'm also, what's the right word? Introspective. I think about what I do, who I am, the consequences of that a lot. I'm not always right, but I'm always happy to talk about it, if that makes sense. But I want to be clear about this. For my show, because that's what we're talking about, it's important to me that it's not about me.
Yep.
You notice the name of that show is not called Michael Waitze's Asia Tech Podcast. You notice if you look at the podcast page, it almost never mentions my name. You'll see no pictures about me. There are plenty of people out there that are trying to do this, but their narcissism gets in the way of their storytelling. Anyway, as I told you before, my mother always said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So I'm going to stop it there. But I will say that it's pretty clear that I'm not trying to tell stories about me. So it makes me happy that I can tell stories about other people. And do I mind being on the other side of the table? Not at all. Because I do think life is a conversation. I told you that. I'm happy to have a conversation I actually encourage my guests to ask me questions as well, but most of them don't. It's not normal to them to do that in this format,
Right.
right? Like I'm happy asking you questions. I asked you about your microphone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious what that red thing is behind you on the wall.
It's the stress test kind of thing. It's a wall bag. That's why there are two
Okay, I don't
boxing
know.
gloves there as well.
I wasn't sure if those were boxing gloves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, from time to time, I'll hold mitts for my son as well, so that he can get a little bit of exercise in from time to time.
How old is he?
He's 10. He's 10. A little. He's They grow up fast, man.
That's
They
real.
really do. Oh, absolutely.
10 is real.
Yeah. Speaking of growing fast, you have so many podcasts that are popping up. The latest one being the Wolfcast and all. Now, first of all, right, I'd like to ask if you get all these ideas and you are applying them to various industries, or are people coming to you and saying, hey, I would like to work with you, I need your skill set, and we're going to build this together?
So both, actually. But every podcast I do, so sometimes people will ask me, yeah, sorry, we used to have this joke at I'm trying to remember the name of this product that another firm had when I was back working in finance. Yeah, there was something called the death spiral bond.
What is that?
And I don't remember the particulars of it, but a lot of people bought it and lost a lot of money. I'm laughing, but only because we used to joke on the trading desk, like it's in the name. It says death spiral. Like, what was your expectation?
So the name of the bond was really Death Spiral. I thought that was just a nickname.
I don't remember exactly, but I remember joking about this on the trading desk, and one of the guys was like, "It's in the name. It says death spiral bond. Like, what were your expectations?" So that phrase, like it's in the name, I can't get it out of my head. So sometimes people will ask me, "What's the Asia Tech podcast about?" I just think of the death spiral bond.
It's in the name.
If I have to explain it, it's probably not my problem, kind of thing.
Yeah. Going back to the point you made earlier on about when we were talking about getting guests to ask you questions, right?
Right.
Do you notice that is this something that is very peculiar to Asian culture, that is either they're too shy to ask questions or they don't know how to ask questions?
So I think so two things can be true at the same time. I think that's actually true, but I've had plenty of people on the podcast that have not been from Asia, and I'd say like 80% of them don't understand how to ask questions properly. Not that they don't understand, but they're not comfortable in the format. They feel like a guest. Do you know what I mean? And because they are the guest, it's like me going to your house and you're making me dinner and me walking into the kitchen and going, Edric, no, a little too much salt, kind of thing. I think that's how people feel. Right?
Okay.
So it's not that they don't know. It's just that maybe they don't know in this format how to do it and make it feel natural to them. Like I could be a world-class chef, but I'm still not going to walk into your kitchen and go, I think you're cooking that pasta a little too long. It's not my house, right? And I think that's the way most people feel. As a guest, which is what we call them, they're more comfortable just answering.
Right. And this has got something to do with guest prep. There was a book on podcasting that I actually read, and it was very important to actually send things like what your podcast is about, when it's going to be, what the frequency of the publishing is, basically the details, and what are the questions that you'll probably be asking. And this is the guest prep that tends to help a little bit, gives them a little bit of confidence. How do you prep your guests? I mean, you've received mine, so...
I like to have a 10 or 15 minute call with a guest before they actually record. I highly encourage it, actually. One, it makes them feel comfortable. Two, they can ask really important questions like, do I need a fancy setup? Should I go buy a microphone? If I say something stupid, will you take it out? Who edits it? How much time do you want to do this? What's the format? All these questions that people have. I love having that prep call because and also remember, by the time we're done, we've just had a 15-minute conversation with someone that you may or may not know yet. So now they're comfortable. And then if you do it right, if you do it really well, actually, now they're looking forward to coming on the show. Now they're as excited about being on the show as you are about having them on the show. I think there's some trepidation for some guests that they're going to get grilled. I've had people say to me, do I need to know the statistics in my monthly sales and my month over month growth? And I just say to them, like, nobody cares. That's not what this is about.
They're fearful of this guerrilla tactics that sometimes, or they get paranoid about certain things.
Well, I think they watch too much MSNBC and they're just afraid that someone's going to try to trap them in something. Like, well, originally you said you were building a company that does X and then you pivoted to this. Like, did your parents approve? Like, how could you get away with that kind of? Nobody cares.
Come sit back. Tell me about your father.
Yeah, exactly. Like, nobody cares about this stuff. So we don't do that. I do like to ask difficult questions, right? Because I'm curious. But again, because it's a conversation in my mind, and I run them through exactly the situation that I want them to understand that we're in when we're doing the recording. And I think that by the time we get there, it's really great. I don't think it's actually necessary to, and again, it depends on the type of guest, to give them questions beforehand. Because I don't want to have it be rote.
Yeah, correct. I mean, we talked about this earlier on as well, that it's a 50-50 thing. If you give it to them, for some, they want to be extremely prepared.
Right.
And then it comes out being very scripted. And for others, if they don't get prepared, then there are so many ums and ahs, and our 2-hour podcast becomes an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually, what's the right word? I'm not disappointed by some of the speech patterns that you encounter when you have a guest on. They're not trained to do this.
Right.
And I think as a host, I have to be I think as a set of hosts, have to be very forgiving about speech patterns. One of the reasons why I edit so heavily, and people make fun of me for this, they're like, you're too anal about the editing. And I always say, I want my guests to sound as smart as they really are. And if removing the hesitation from their speech makes it sound like they know their domain, that they have the domain knowledge that they definitely do have, otherwise they wouldn't be there. If that helps them out, I'm willing to take the time to do it, because that's important to me.
Absolutely.
Right. And remember, but this is also really important to me. And I think part of this comes from living out of my home country for 30 something years, is that sometimes a lot of the people that I interview, English is not their only language. So I have to give them a ton of credit. You know, I do this show eCommerce Undercover with a guy whose native language is French. And, you know, Martin and I joke around about, hey, let's do the next show in French. And he'll say it to me in French. But it's true. And I say to him, that's fine as long as we do the following show in Japanese. Right?
Okay. Yeah. And that's an asset to you, because for those who don't know, you stayed in Japan for quite a while, didn't you?
22 years.
Yeah, that's quite a while. And speaking of which, I know I jump around a lot, but I really do want to know, from Japan, how did you end up just, saying, okay, Thailand's a nice place, I'll come here? I mean, it's not like it's okay. Look, presumptuously, people are going to say, oh yeah, okay, Thailand, right? Yeah. Okay. Party capital.
What are they going to say?
Yeah. Party
say?
nightlife. Yeah. Exactly. But why did you really choose Thailand?
In 1998, I went on a pre-honeymoon trip. And actually, let me just back up for a second. Some of my friends, when we were younger, actually went from Japan to Thailand. And I'm talking about really young. We were like 25 or 26. Mm-hmm. And back then, there was a reputation that Thailand had, which even to today, I still don't agree that that's actually real. There are pockets of every country where you can go and do things that are silly. Mm-hmm. They just are. I mean, I used to have to walk through Times Square every day on my way to Morgan Stanley, for God's sakes. I'm not sure there's anything in Thailand that rivals what was going on in Times Square in 1988.
I was there in 1988, yeah.
Yeah, if you'd been there, like, I saw dead guys on the street. I saw people get mugged. Like, it was really dangerous. I've never experienced that in Thailand, not once. And I've never felt danger. But I didn't go on that trip. But when I decided to get married, I came here on like a pre-honeymoon trip. And one of the reasons why I came here was because another of my friends had traveled to Bangkok for business. and had said to me, you have to, before you die, you have to stay at the Oriental in Bangkok. It's the most amazing hotel in the world. It's consistently the top rated hotel in the world. I'd never heard of it. And the firms where we worked had corporate rates there. So you could stay at a 5-star hotel and get 5-star service, be on the Chao Phraya River. The first money that I paid there was $125 a night. And it was just insane. It was so amazing. And that trip, we drove from Bangkok to Chiang Mai to Chiang Rai, and just had an incredible trip. And kind of fell in love with what was going on here. So much so that we kept coming back. I moved here in 2011. That was what? 13 years before? I'd say in the interim period of time, we came to Thailand 7 or 8 times on vacation, and almost always around New Year's. We made some great friends around the pool at the Oriental. And one of my buddies from Goldman Sachs was living here. So periodically we'd go visit him in his office and in his apartment. And he said, dude, you should move here. Best medical care in the world. My daughter was in international school, the best international schools in the world. And it's safe. And there's great business going on here. And when the Fukushima earthquake hit in Tokyo, and I think I told you this offline, but we didn't understand the food chain. My daughter was 10. There was no way I was letting her go through puberty in a place where I didn't understand like what the impact of radiation was going to be on her through the food. Yeah, I wasn't worried about airborne radiation at all.
Right.
And I looked for places to live. And I thought about Taiwan or Korea because I didn't want to leave Asia. And I also looked at Hong Kong and Singapore. But it's impossible for someone like I am to go to Hong Kong or Singapore unless you work for, Goldman Sachs or Citigroup.
Right.
Because there's no value there. I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean the places where I would live and the school where I'd have to send my daughter is are squeezed higher because no one's paying for it. When most of the foreigners at international schools have that school paid for by their company. So they're indifferent to price. Right, and that's one of the reasons why, it's one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why, condos and houses and apartments in Singapore are so expensive.
Yep.
Because most of the high-end people that live there don't pay for them. And if they're senior executives, what do you think their monthly housing allowance is?
I wish I knew.
Well, I do know.
Oh.
But that pushes the price higher. My last housing allowance in Tokyo was $15,000 a month.
No, come on. That's what some people make that's what some people back then in Thailand would make in a year.
More, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I came to Thailand alone, so I didn't come here for work. So I was not an expat here. But I was an expat in Tokyo, and I would have to have competed for schools and for other services with people with expats in Hong Kong and in Singapore. It just didn't make any sense. And when I went and looked around in Bangkok, it just made perfect sense to me. Like I said, the international schools here are part of CSAC sites. I can't remember anymore. But like NIST, where my daughter graduated with a bilingual IB degree, is just as good as UWC. No difference. As a matter of fact, they play sports against each other. So it's the same thing. The British school here is amazing. ISB is world class. The facilities are unbelievable. So moving to Bangkok seemed like a natural, plus day-to-day life has super value.
My brother was from ISB.
Say it again?
My brother was in ISB back when we stayed there. Yeah. We lived in Bangkok from 86 or 87, and back in Singapore in 89.
Yeah. So your brother went to the campus. Your brother went to the campus on Soi 15.
Yep. I was in Ekamai.
Yeah, Ekamai International School. Right, but so you can see, and then there's Bangkok Prep, which is now huge. St. Andrews, all these great schools here. So that was one of the reasons why we felt super comfortable living here. Plus, I wasn't working, so I wasn't earning any money, and just the value for the money was the best place. By far. I would still encourage people to move here because it's an incredible place to live. And from a startup from a startup ecosystem standpoint, I think it's almost better than anywhere else in this region. But again, I'm biased, right? Because I'm here.
I agree with you. The startup scene in Thailand is something amazing. When I used to go there for business trips, just to meet up with some of the new startups and on the e-commerce, logistics, transport, and freighting side of things, these guys were making so much headway in the way that they were able to bring the tech together. Be whether or not it's going to be something that was very niched or it's an integrator or aggregator of sorts. There were so many that were just coming up. And even if you look at, let's say, for example, the e-commerce club or, the e-logistics club or the Thai e-commerce association, and even the grants that are coming out from DIBA.
The NIA, the BOI.
That's right. DIPA. So it's great. They have amazing grants. And that's what brought them to Singapore to be able to exhibit with us at the time. That was great.
Tell me why you think that's the case. No, it's okay. Tell me why you think that's the case. Like why would living in Bangkok be conducive to that type of development?
I think it gives you a real lay of the land, a real feeling, a pulse on everything. If you were to do it remotely, on the other hand, you don't necessarily understand the people, the culture, and the way that how these startups are built up, and why the kind of necessity that comes from it.
Right. So here's my take. I get to ask the question and then I get to answer it.
Great.
But here's my take on this. And that is, if you build something in Singapore, let's say you build something like, I don't know, Redmart, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Redmart's a really interesting company. I don't know if you remember how it started.
I have no idea.
No, I was just laughing about you muting the microphone. Anyway, but Redmart, was supposed to be online grocery delivery, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's great. And Singapore's a great market to do that. But you don't have to solve too many logistical problems. And you don't have to solve too many. Remember, this is all relative. They had to solve plenty of problems. And the guys that built that were very smart and knew what they were doing. But I'm talking in relative terms. The roads in Singapore are pretty clean.
Yep.
They're very well organized. And there's not that much traffic. Now, Singaporeans might argue, oh my God, it's always traffic, but it's nothing like it is in Bangkok and Jakarta.
Oh, please. Try the Philippines, try Indonesia, try anywhere else. Oh my God.
So you have to solve fewer problems in Singapore. And also the problems that you do solve are not, they're not transferable to Bangkok.
Yep.
Because you can take the Redmart model and try to bring it to Thailand or to Bangkok, and you're going to have to relearn everything. So that's why I think building a business in Bangkok, particularly one like eCommerce or particularly one that has a logistics aspect to it, means that then you can go to the rest of Southeast Asia, because all of the problems that you have to solve here are in some way transferable to Jakarta and to Ho Chi Minh and to, Hanoi and Manila.
Yep.
Because it's structurally very hard, not to mention the payments, right? Like I have a green screen behind me and I paid cash on delivery for it because you still can.
Yep.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I can't remember where I bought it. Maybe it was Lazada. I can't remember, but I just paid COD. You have to be able to pay COD in Thailand.
Yep. It's still a big thing. A couple of years ago during one of the conferences, it was they were mentioning that in the Philippines, right? It was people still they only had ATM cards. They did not have debit or credit cards. So everything was still COD. And you cannot imagine all these delivery guys, right? The couriers and all that, who are carrying tens of thousands of dollars in cash a day and running around. I mean, how is that secure for them? How is that safe for them? Which means that, these guys have to be like delivery and Brinks all together.
Okay, so this is a really good point. I had the same thought that you did. And I remember asking Paul, right, Savronakun, one of the founders of eCommerce,
eCommerce.
As they were starting to build that business, I said, you're going to have people delivering iPhones to somebody's house. Like, tell me how that's not going to get stolen. This is the jaded Tokyoite, right, talking.
Uh-huh.
And he said, well, Michael, you don't understand. He said, let me explain it to you. That delivery guy, first of all, he said this. He said, you know that in Asia, family is very important. And the motorbike that guy rides, he cannot afford to buy by himself.
Mm-hmm.
So his family chips in. So his uncle put in 2,000 baht, his aunt put in 5,000 baht, his sister put in some money. And he's doing that job, and he's also paying them back, but he's the face of their family. And if he steals something, he doesn't just embarrass himself, he embarrasses the whole family. And he also lets them down. Right? And the other thing they did was they took a small deposit. I think back then it was like 20,000 baht. So the family would put together that deposit so that he could become a motorcycle driver, a delivery guy. And if he stole something, he would lose that deposit. That's not his money either. And this is generalizing, right? Every guy or gal is not like this.
Right.
But there are these little sort of social mechanisms in place that won't allow him to steal it. And that's what makes cash on delivery possible. It's not the only thing. Most people won't steal, but the people that are maybe inclined to can't because their family will torch them. And they'll lose face for their family for the rest of their lives. That's why they can ride around with like 5 iPhones and, $2,000 in their pocket and not steal it. Not the only reason why, but that's one of the social mechanisms in place to prevent that or to interdict it. Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that does make sense. The Thai people are very honorable people, I have to say.
I think all people are honorable. I really do, because I do think most people care about their family.
Do you find yourself to be more of an optimist or more of a realist?
What do you think?
I think you're an optimist.
I can't help it. I try to be a realist every day, but the optimism gets in the way.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I understand what you mean, because my wife says the same thing about me. How is it that you can still see good things in these people who are irritating the hell out of us? I'm like, because I can. I don't need a reason.
I mean, I can identify the bad people for sure.
And
there are plenty of them out there. Yeah.
Oh, plenty. This is something I also wanted to ask. In your opinion, with the Michael Waitze Media hat, why should companies get into the podcasting space? Because everybody's getting into it, right? But nobody knows why. You're seeing it on LinkedIn, you're seeing it on YouTube. Look, even real estate agents are doing their own podcasts now, trying to sell real estate, right? So why the podcasting space?
I think in the same way that everybody kind of banded around Clubhouse for about 3 months, everybody wants to do the thing that they feel is trendy. And in the same way that most people were bad at Clubhouse or that bad at some kind of dance or whatever, you can't be good at every trend. Like, you're not going to see me on TikTok.
Not going to do a dance?
No.
Okay, cool.
No. Do you understand what I mean? Like, everybody tries to go with whatever that trend is that's happening at the time. And, it almost feels like the day you buy your first BMW, when you go out on the road, you feel like everybody's driving a BMW. And if you're not, like, you know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
At some point, how many episodes have you done?
Well, you are number 43.
Right? So you have not stopped.
No.
Most people stop.
I'm staying on my lane.
Because it's hard.
Thanks. Well,
no, because it's hard.
You know what's really amazing about that? You're not the first person to say that. Everybody who asks about this says what you're doing is really hard. But to be honest, right? Touch your heart. Do you feel that it's hard?
I think to do it really well, it's really hard. But wait a second. But that doesn't mean I don't enjoy it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's a different question. Do I love what I do? I wouldn't want to do anything else right now. Right. Is it difficult to do well? Yeah. I mean, tell me you haven't. How many recordings you do today?
I did one. I just did one this morning.
But that's 2 today, right? I'm going to do 4 today. This is my 3rd.
It's great life. Really, really great life.
And this week, I told you, I go Monday to Sunday. Sunday to me is not the beginning of the week. It's the end of the week. Let me just count really quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 recordings this week. But I love doing it.
Right.
But I will say this, when I first started, and I think I said this to you offline, but I'll say it online now. I remember the first few times I had a guest on the show, and I just 100% hoped they didn't show up.
One of those days.
Because it just, because it meant that if they did, I had to succeed. I had to be good at it. And I think at the beginning, when you start doing a podcast, just like anything else, you have to, when you go up a ski lift for the first time, you have to be 100% sure that when your chair gets to the point where you have to get off, you're going to fall and that lift could hit you in the back of the head. But it's the same thing. You can't be afraid of it. I'm not saying that happened to me, but it came close. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Because I'm a terrible skier. But again, just like everything else, if you don't give up, you should fundamentally get better at it. I didn't say get good at it, but you'll get better at it.
Indeed.
But it's hard. A lot of people give up. They're like, oh, shit. And no one's listening. Your first 5 episodes, nobody will listen to. Nobody. I mean, look, Uber itself started in a vacuum. Nobody knew what they were working on and nobody cared. Right? So you just have to just keep going.
Right.
And I think that a lot of companies want to be in the audio business, but they don't know how.
True,
Right?
true,
It takes
true.
a while to build that expertise, for sure.
Yeah, this is one of the things that companies are trying to do. They do want to do their own podcast, but they don't understand why. It became very much like trend jacking, like what you mentioned. It's just trying to get it out there. Is it more of a marketing gimmick, or do they really have something to say? I know in your experience, companies do approach you to build their podcasts for them, I'm sure.
Yep.
Now, what has been most of the misconceptions that they have with podcasts?
From the company side.
Yep.
So first of all, that it's very easy to do. I've spoken to a couple of companies, and I said to them, how long does it take to produce one episode? And they said, oh, well, if it's a 30-minute show, there's maybe a few minutes before, a few minutes after, put some music around it. I don't know, like an hour.
Huh.
But that's okay.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of right, but actually 100% wrong. Because if you want to have a thoughtful conversation, you have to have information first. So you have to do research on the person that's going to be your guest. Oh, but I know most of my guests. Okay. But how well? Right? In other words, do you know where they went to high school? Do you know who their favorite sports team is? Like all these little things, and this gets back to the art of conversation. If you know these little details, you may not have to use them all. But if you can, it just makes the conversation so much better and so much more authentic, right? And so much more natural. And when I explained to people that a normal episode without any, just think about it. We were supposed to record on what day? Wednesday? I can't remember.
Yeah, Wednesday.
Right? So, and we spent an hour on the phone with each other. That counts as time. Right? That counts as time. Because if you're good at what you do, and you are, you don't just go, oh, darn, it's not working. Bye. Right? You try to fix it. You try to do whatever. You know what I mean? That takes time. That's empathy. And that's why you're good at what you do. But if you include that along with then all the research you have to do and all the equipment and all the sort of back end stuff, the uploading, all that, it probably takes 8 to 10 hours for an episode.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. The editing, the rendering, everything.
Right. So I did 11 episodes this week.
And you've got editors, right?
No.
You're going to do this all yourself, all by yourself.
So I'm in the process of hiring somebody. It's not hiring somebody, to working in partnership with the team that it does what I call audio engineering. It's not editing. But up until now, I've been doing all my own, mostly all of my own editing.
So, okay, so that's why you don't sleep at night. Okay, I get it. That's crazy. You got 11 episodes to, man, and you're still taking your time to do this podcast. I really appreciate it, man.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and man, the companies right now that so they have the misconception that it's fast to do, it's easy. But do you ever ask them back, like, why do you want to do a podcast? Like, are you wasting your own time?
If it's done right, and I'm very committed to this actually. If it's done right, it's not a waste of time. Definitely not. And here's the reason why. At some point, somebody will be talking about your company. And if you're not controlling the conversation, then they are. So my girlfriend in college's dad said this to me once. And again, I've never forgotten it. He said, you can either live life or let life live you. And I think if a great company will have their own media, because at some point somebody will be talking about you. And if you've been controlling the conversation the whole time, if they come out and say something, and if you're genuine about it, right? It's going to be really hard to convince somebody that what they're saying is true and what you've said is not true if you've been consistently saying the same thing over time and it's been proven to be true before. So my whole mantra around this is you should do this. You should do this with somebody who understands the medium. And you should do it because you need to control the conversation around you. That means whether you as an individual or you as a small company or you as a large company. And I have these conversations with companies all the time, and the ones that get it, here's the thing. The ones that get it, and that could mean individuals or companies, they get it right away. And they say, yeah, let's do that together. Because it's not just throwing stuff out onto the internet. You have to have a sort of methodical way of telling that story and controlling your message. And if it's scattershot and if it's not consistent, right? One, it's not going to make any sense, but two, no one's going to listen. So then you're just throwing stuff out into the ether that no one cares about. And then not only you're not controlling your conversation, but you're wasting time and money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you also get the question, how long is an ideal business podcast?
I do.
Yeah, and in your opinion, how long do you think it should be?
I don't know. How delicious does a great steak have to be?
Very delicious.
It's a silly question. It's just a silly question. In other words, people would say to me all the time, they're like, when I first started podcasting, like an hour is too long. Like too long for what?
Yeah, maybe for you, but not for me.
But if I'm running 10K, I'm happy to listen to, and I'm running 6-minute kilometers. That's an hour. Like, why is that too long? Have you ever had dinner with somebody and you only had an hour-long conversation? You're like, okay, gotta go 60 minutes. I'm out of here. Check, please. Or have your best dates and your best dinners been the one where like the waiters and waitresses are just like sweeping the floor around you, turning off the lights and hoping like, when is Edric leaving? Kind of thing. But that's your best date ever, right? And that's the best podcast ever too. It's like, I've actually had to stop guests from talking because the conversation was so good, but I was watching time and thinking, okay, it's been over an hour. We should probably stop this. But if the conversation's good and it's compelling and people are learning things, here's the thing. It should be just long enough so that people want to keep eavesdropping in on your private conversation. I don't think there's an optimal time. And I'm willing to have a conversation with anybody who says that there is.
That's a very, very interesting. Yeah. Okay. I am conflicted when it comes to this because, on the one hand, it depends on the objective, right, of what we want. If we're looking at the podcast purely as an art form, as pure as it can be, again, it's about the conversation. It should go on as long as we want it to go. But for a business podcast, for example, what the feedback that I've gotten before was that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, too short. Those are quick cuts. 1 hour is too long. 15 to 30 minutes seems to be the best because, you know, we want to reach out to people, and we just want those that particular format for this and this and this. That's their idea, right? That's the idea that was that was actually presented before.
Right.
But somehow or rather, I really do prefer long form. If not, you know, these podcasts would not last anything more than half an hour. And I'd love to go, you know, an hour to an hour and a half because, okay, this question was actually posed to Joe Rogan before from Joe Rogan Experience, right?
Right.
I forgot, one guest asked him, he said, you were the first one, right, to do like 3-hour podcasts, 3-4 hour podcasts. And he asked, why 3 hours or 4 hours? He said, well, it's like a live show. Yeah, but why 3 hours? Because that's when people got to go pee. It's such a...
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I've how many episodes of Joe Rogan Experience have you seen?
My goodness, I started out when he was with with Red Band doing the Death Squad. Oh man, long ago.
I give you a ton of credit because I've seen none.
Oh, okay.
I've never watched one of his shows. Never. I mean, I've seen little bits and pieces, so I definitely know who he is.
Yeah.
I'm much happier to watch him call a UFC fight than I am to listen to a Joe Rogan podcast. But that's just me. Right?
It's not your cup of tea.
I just don't think I've learned anything interesting by listening to him talk to people.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's his interview style, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure what he's trying to accomplish.
Ah, okay. What I picked up from him, because humor seems to be one of my greater traits, according to individual strength thingy from VIA, right? So allegedly. Allegedly, right? Look, it's an internet test. I can't tell whether it's real or legit or anything, right? So it's like saying, hey, where'd you get your doctorate from? WebMD, right? Yeah, cool. So he goes and what I like about the way he interviews people is that he's able to always interject with small little nuggets of information, and he's willing to play the dumb guy even though he is quite well read. And of course, being a comedian helps to also bring levity to many situations as well, and that I quite liked. And this is again, I'm trying to model in a certain way and learn certain energy, the kind of energy that he brings, and how do we fuse business with entertainment together, you know, and build that special brand of a podcast. And I guess this is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I don't find him funny at all.
Okay. So who's your favorite comedian then? Are you like a Monty Python kind of guy or what? The Life of Brian.
The Life of Brian was okay, but I kind of liked Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I used to watch it at night when I was a kid.
Yeah.
My favorite comedian.
I'll go get my coconuts.
Yeah, the Knights Who Say Me. You didn't think I remembered that, did you?
Yeah, of course.
My favorite comedian, I don't know. It kind of rotates. Like I've found some really great comedians recently. I can't remember the guy's name. He was on Saturday Night Live, but he was just hilarious. I watched, obviously Dave Chappelle's genius.
Oh,
I find that anything that comes out of Dave Chappelle's mouth is just hilarious. And if it's not hilarious, thought-provoking. But I think that's kind of what stand-up comedy should be.
Yep.
And Seth Meyers did one of my favorite hours of all time a couple of years ago. And of course, Louis C.K. does some great stuff too.
Oh, I love Louis C.K. Unfortunately, he got that thing. But anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, he's back doing stand-up, right? I think, whatever.
He's back doing shows this year.
We can talk about that on a different cover, but Louis C.K. is brilliant and is a man who worked at his craft as well, right?
Yep.
And if you watch his life story, it's actually more interesting maybe than his comedy. But he took a lot of inspiration from George Carlin. And George Carlin, I won't say befriended him, but, Carlin was also a pioneer, right? And whose style changed a lot over time if you followed George Carlin's career. But one of the things he told Louis C.K. was, you cannot recycle old material. Every year, if you're going to go on the road every year, you got to start from scratch.
Yep.
If you really want to be good at this, you got to be able to start from scratch. And your last show can be nothing like this show. And, you know, comedians are always supposed to like start with their worst joke and end on their best joke. So you're just like dying.
Yep.
And Louis C.K. once said, and I think about this a lot actually when I'm constructing things, he said, I would write that 1 hour show and end on my best joke. And then I'd throw away the first 2/3. So I had a great opening. And then I'd build the next 2/3 to be better.
Right. He's constantly getting better at what he does. Yeah, I'm not sure whether you've seen the interview that they had on HBO. I think it was Being Funny. It was him, Chris Rock, Jerry Seinfeld, and Ricky Gervais.
Ricky Gervais.
So the four of them were actually having a conversation about this and actually deconstructing, you know, what comedy was about, trying to do that. I mean, it was a bit of a... It doesn't always get technical and everything, but it was very, very interesting to just see the insights about the kinds of language that they chose to use, the thought process, right, and how they tackle certain things, and the sensitivity or insensitivity of word and text. So I think that this also really does apply to podcasting in this sense that
absolutely
there shouldn't be, okay, look, everybody has a voice. Everybody has the freedom to choose to say certain things. At the same time, it should not be something that is self-censored. The idea must come across, but I don't think that it should be something too controversial or radical either, right? But we can present these ideas and allow the public to I don't know, hopefully, whether it's educating them or just providing them perspective. But it's never about implementing my ideas or ideals on somebody else. That should never have been the case. Yeah.
No. My ideal is, at least on my show, or on all of my shows, is to talk as little as possible and to give a platform to the person who's trying to make a point or to get known or to introduce something groundbreaking or to inform the world about a viewpoint. I think it's important that people understand that in most cases, it's not what you say that matters, it's how you say it. And that if you're speaking to a wide audience, you should also treat that audience with respect. I think most people get that. There are very small pockets of people who just want to talk the way they want to talk, but their message gets lost anyway. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, if that's fair.
Very interesting. Yeah,
Anyway.
At the end of the day, it's the intent, your purpose, what you really want on the other side, or from the other side, or that goes to the other side. Well, I think we are running out of time, if I'm not wrong. I do have one more segment to do with you, Michael, and that is the last segment that I do with every guest that comes onto the show. It is a rapid-fire 10-question segment known as the EPIC Questionnaire. Michael Waitze with the EPIC Questionnaire. Here we go. Question number 1. One word you love the most.
Empathy.
One word you dislike the most.
Corrosive.
Interesting. If you could have a conversation with one person, fictional, non-fictional, dead or alive, who would that be?
Who would it be? Yeah, I don't know. There's so many people.
Well, pick
There are
one
just
off the
so
top
many
of your head.
people. Yeah, my grandfather.
What do you say to yourself in the mirror every morning?
You are pretty ugly.
That works for me. Name one superpower that you'd like to have.
That I'd like to have. I'd love to be able to fly.
Favorite dish to eat?
Oh, lobster, hands down, no question about it.
Boiled, broiled, or steamed?
Steamed lobster with butter on the side. That's it. It's all I need. Then I can die.
All right, cool. Favorite travel spot or the next travel spot you'd like to go to once borders open up?
I think Bangkok is an amazing city to travel to, but I live here. But the place that I'd like to go more than any is it's a small town in the south of France called Eze, E-Z-E.
Something in the arts that you've always wanted to do, but you've yet to do so.
That I've wanted to go see or that I've just wanted to do?
wanted to do? Something in the arts that you've always wanted to do?
Stand-up comedy.
And you haven't done it yet?
Nope.
I
I'd
do
also
wanna
like to
put
make a movie, but I will definitely make a movie. That's in the business plan. So
Very nice. What does retirement look like to you?
death,
Death. That's retirement.
death, death.
Death before retirement. How do you want to be remembered? What's your legacy?
Yeah, just kindly. Do you know what I mean? Somebody who was kind and empathetic.
Well, that works. And that is the Epic Questionnaire with Michael Waitze from Michael Waitze Media. Now, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us in this week's episode of the Epic Podcast. Again, giant thank you to all of you for listening and making it this far in the conversation, or at least exploring the art of conversation with Michael Waitze and myself. Do us a favor, go over to @Michael Waitze Media, go Google him, find his podcast if you're into tech, insurtech, fintech, and all things tech. It's an amazing site, all right? Amazing content that you can find out there on Spotify as well as YouTube. Check it out. And while you're doing that as well, give us a like, comment, and subscribe. We are also available on Spotify too, or wherever else you get your podcasts. So with that, all right, that marks the end of this week's podcast. Michael, anything you would like to say to the guests before we go?
Thanks for having me, Edric. This was a blast.
Oh, indeed it was. Indeed it was. Okay, with that, we are out and we'll see you next week. Bye. Peace out.